The night air had a sharp bite to it as Thomas Chen stepped out of the tall glass building that housed his company's headquarters. At 45, Thomas had built an empire from nothing, turning a small tech startup in his garage into one of the biggest companies in the world. The business magazines called him a visionary. His competitors called him ruthless. But tonight, as he pulled his expensive coat tighter around his shoulders, he felt neither powerful nor special, just tired. "Where to, sir?" asked his driver, holding the door to the sleek black car. Thomas checked his watch. It was almost midnight. Another late meeting that could have been an email. "Home," he said simply, sliding into the soft leather seat. As the car pulled away from the curb, Thomas loosened his tie and looked out at the city lights. This was his favorite time, when the day's stress began to melt away and he could just watch the world go by. The city looked different at night, both harsher and more beautiful. "Sir, there's construction on the main road," his driver said, glancing in the rearview mirror. "I'll need to take the detour through Riverside." Thomas nodded absently. Riverside wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people like him usually went. It had once been the heart of the city, but years of neglect had left it struggling. Thomas had grown up in a place not unlike it, though he rarely talked about those days now. As they drove slowly down streets lined with small shops, many with security gates pulled down for the night, Thomas found himself really looking at this part of the city for the first time in years. A few people were still out, hurrying along with heads down against the cold. Others huddled in doorways or on benches, people with nowhere else to go as the temperature dropped. The car stopped at a red light. On the bench at the bus stop, a woman had made herself a small nest of sorts. She wore several layers of clothes despite the mild fall weather, and a small backpack and plastic bag sat neatly beside her. She wasn't sprawled out but curled neatly on her side, as if trying to take up as little space as possible even in sleep. There was something familiar about her. Thomas leaned closer to the window, squinting slightly. The light changed and his driver began to pull away. "Wait," Thomas said suddenly. "Stop the car." His driver looked back in surprise but pulled over to the curb. Thomas kept his eyes on the sleeping woman. It couldn't be. But as a streetlight illuminated her face, he felt his stomach drop. It was Rosa, the same woman who had cleaned his penthouse apartment 3 times a week for the past 2 years. Quiet, hard-working Rosa, who dusted his awards and vacuumed around his expensive furniture. Who always smiled politely when he passed her in the hallway. Who remembered how he liked the cushions arranged on his couch. Who never complained or called in sick or gave him any reason to really notice her at all. And here she was, sleeping on a bench like she had nowhere else to go. "Sir, is everything all right?" his driver asked, concern in his voice. Thomas couldn't take his eyes off Rosa. "I know her," he said quietly. "The homeless woman." The surprise in his driver's voice made Thomas wince. "She works for me. She cleans my apartment." A heavy silence filled the car. Thomas felt something uncomfortable stirring inside him. Was it guilt, shock? He'd never given much thought to Rosa's life outside of the hours she spent cleaning his home. He paid his housekeeping service well. At least he assumed the company paid their workers well. He'd never actually asked, "Should we do something?" his driver finally asked. Thomas hesitated. What was the right thing to do here? Wake her up? That seemed intrusive. Pretend he hadn't seen her? That seemed worse. Pull up a little closer, he decided. As the car moved forward, Thomas rolled down his window. Rosa was still asleep, her body curled tightly against the cold, her hands tucked under her chin. "Rosa?" he called softly. She didn't stir. "Rosa?" he said louder this time. Her eyes flew open with the alertness of someone used to being startled awake. When she saw Thomas, her expression changed from fear to shock to shame in the space of seconds. "Mr. Chen," she said, quickly sitting up and smoothing her clothes, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. I was just waiting for the bus." They both knew there were no buses running at this hour. "Rosa, are you—" Thomas paused, not knowing how to ask the question delicately. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" She looked down at her hands. "Yes, sir." "I'm fine." The lie hung between them, making the night air seem even colder. Thomas made a split-second decision. "Let me give you a ride." "No, thank you," Rosa said quickly, too quickly. "The bus will be here soon." "It's midnight," Thomas said gently. "There are no more buses tonight." Rosa didn't respond, just clutched her backpack tighter. Thomas felt completely out of his depth. In business, he always knew what to say, how to negotiate, how to get what he wanted. But this wasn't business. This was human. And he realized with a start just how rusty he was at simply being human. "Look," he said, "it's cold tonight. I can drive you to a hotel, get you a room. No strings attached." Rosa finally looked up at him, and Thomas was struck by the dignity in her eyes despite her situation. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your concern, but I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Thomas said, though they both knew it was. "Consider it an advance on your next paycheck." "I can't accept that," Rosa said firmly. Thomas was baffled. In his world, money solved problems. He'd never had anyone refuse his help before, especially someone in obvious need. "Why not?" Rosa sighed, looking tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Because on Monday I will still be your maid, and we will both remember this night, and things will be different." Thomas hadn't considered that. In trying to help, he'd put her in an uncomfortable position. He felt clumsy and thoughtless. "I understand," he said finally, "but I can't just drive away and leave you here." "Why not?" Rosa asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. "You didn't know about this yesterday, and you slept fine." Her words hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He'd been living his life completely unaware of, or perhaps deliberately blind to, her struggles. And he would have continued that way if not for a chance detour. "Because now I do know," he said simply, "and I can't unknow it." Something in his voice must have reached her because Rosa's expression softened slightly. "I have a situation," she admitted, "but it's temporary. I had to leave my apartment 3 months ago when my roommate moved out. I couldn't afford the rent alone. I've been staying at the shelter on Oak Street, but they're full tonight." Thomas felt a strange mix of relief that she wasn't completely homeless and distress that someone who worked for him was living so precariously. "What about friends? Family?" he asked. "My family is back home in Peru," she said, "and I don't want to burden my friends. Many of them are in similar situations." Thomas thought for a moment. What if we think of this differently, not as charity?" Rosa looked at him warily. "I own several properties around the city," Thomas explained. "One of them is a small apartment building not far from here. The manager's unit is empty right now. You could stay there. I already told you, as the night manager," Thomas continued. "The previous one left last month and I haven't filled the position. It's simple work. Be available for emergency calls, keep an eye on the security cameras, accept packages. The unit comes with the job." Rosa studied his face, clearly trying to determine if this was a real offer or just disguised charity. "Why would you trust me with that responsibility? You know nothing about me except that I clean your home and sleep on benches. I know you're reliable. Never missed a day in 2 years. I know you're trustworthy. You have the keys to my home. And I know you're proud, which means you'll do the job well." Rosa was silent for a long moment. Thomas held his breath. "Is this a real job?" she finally asked. "Yes," Thomas said, and as he said it, he realized it was true. His building did need someone, and he suspected Rosa would be excellent at it. "With a real salary?" "Yes, and benefits." Rosa looked down at her backpack, then at the empty street around them. Thomas could see her weighing her options, her pride against her practical needs. "When would I start?" she asked finally. Thomas felt a wave of relief. "Right now, if you'd like." For the first time that night, Rosa smiled, just slightly, but it transformed her tired face. "Okay," she said. "I accept." As Rosa gathered her few belongings and walked toward his car, Thomas felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. It wasn't the satisfaction of closing a business deal or the thrill of a new acquisition. It was something quieter but somehow more significant. Without fully understanding why, Thomas knew that this chance encounter would change both their lives in ways neither of them could predict. The apartment was small but clean, with basic furniture that looked barely used. Rosa stood in the middle of the living room, still not quite believing the turn her night had taken. "The bedroom is through there," Thomas said, pointing to a door on the left. "Bathroom's next to it. Kitchen's stocked with some basics. It's not much, but it's perfect," Rosa cut in. Her voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to spill over. Just an hour ago, she had been preparing to spend another uncomfortable night on that bench. Now she had walls around her, a roof over her head. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of his element. In his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, this kind of situation never came up. The manager's office is downstairs by the front entrance. There's a handbook there that explains everything. The job's not complicated, just be available if tenants need help after hours. Check that doors are locked, accept packages, that kind of thing. Rosa nodded, taking it all in. When should I start? Tomorrow is fine. Get some rest tonight. Thomas pulled a business card from his wallet and wrote a number on the back. This is my personal cell. Call if you need anything. After he left, Rosa sat on the edge of the bed, her bed, at least for now, and let out a long, shaky breath. She'd spent the past 3 months in a careful balancing act, keeping up appearances at work while her personal life crumbled around her. Each night had been a scramble to find safe shelter. Each morning a challenge to look presentable enough to clean the homes of the wealthy. And now, in the strangest twist of fate, the wealthiest of her employers had seen her at her lowest moment, and offered not pity but opportunity. Rosa wasn't naive. She knew Thomas might have created this position just to help her. But she also knew she would make sure he never regretted it. Whatever this job entailed, she would excel at it. With that thought firmly in mind, Rosa finally allowed herself to lie down on the clean sheets and fall into the deepest sleep she'd had in months. Thomas couldn't focus on his morning coffee or the financial news playing on his massive TV. His mind kept drifting back to Rosa, to the shock of seeing his housekeeper asleep on a bench, to the pride in her eyes even in such desperate circumstances. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to his personal assistant. Find out everything you can about how much we pay the cleaning service that sends Rosa to my apartment, and how much of that money actually goes to the workers. Within the hour, the numbers were in front of him, and they made his stomach turn. The cleaning service charged premium rates as expected for servicing luxury buildings, but the workers received barely above minimum wage. No benefits, no security. Thomas leaned back in his chair, feeling a mix of guilt and anger. He'd never thought to ask about these details before. Like so many things in his life, he'd simply paid the bill and assumed everything was handled properly. His phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Chen, this is Rosa. I wanted to thank you again for last night and let you know I've reviewed the manager handbook and started my duties. The previous manager left some issues unaddressed that I'm working to fix. Thomas stared at the message. She'd been through a personal crisis, spent the night in a new place, and was already working to fix problems that weren't even her fault. Meanwhile, he was still sitting in his bathrobe, feeling sorry about something he should have questioned long ago. Glad to hear it. He texted back, let me know if you need anything. He hesitated, then added, and Rosa, please call me Thomas. A week passed before Thomas found a reason to visit the apartment building. He told himself he wanted to check on the property. It had been months since his last inspection, but he knew the real reason was curiosity about how Rosa was doing in her new role. He arrived unannounced in the early evening. The small lobby looked different than he remembered, brighter somehow, with fresh flowers on the front desk and not a speck of dust to be seen. A young couple was speaking with Rosa, who was explaining something about the building's recycling program with patient detail. She wore simple black pants and a blue button-up shirt, a self-styled uniform, he realized, and her hair was pulled back neatly. If he hadn't seen her sleeping on that bench a week ago, he would never have guessed at her recent hardships. When the couple left, Rosa spotted him and straightened slightly. Mr. Chen, we weren't expecting you. Thomas, he corrected. And that's the point of surprise inspections, isn't it? Of course, she said, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Would you like to see the changes I've made? As Rosa led him through the building, Thomas was impressed despite himself. The hallways were spotless. The small community room, which had been largely ignored by the previous manager, was now organized with a bookshelf of shared books and games. The laundry room, once a dingy afterthought, was clean and well-maintained. The washing machine in Unit 3B was leaking, Rosa explained as they walked. I called a plumber as per the handbook. I hope that was all right. More than all right, Thomas said. That's exactly what you should have done. And I've organized a new package system so nothing gets lost. The tenants seemed to appreciate it. As if on cue, an elderly man emerged from one of the apartments and broke into a smile when he saw Rosa. Miss Rosa, just the person I wanted to see. Those light bulbs you changed in my hallway make such a difference. My old eyes can finally see properly. Rosa smiled warmly. I'm glad, Mr. Patel. Don't forget about the building meeting tomorrow evening. We're discussing the garden proposal. After the man returned to his apartment, Thomas raised an eyebrow. Garden proposal? Rosa looked suddenly uncertain. Some of the tenants mentioned wanting a small vegetable garden in the unused space behind the building. I told them if enough people were interested and willing to maintain it, I would bring the idea to the owner. She hesitated. That's you. I should have asked first. No, that's good thinking, Thomas said, genuinely surprised. Community building is important. They finished the tour in Rosa's office, a small room next to her apartment that she had transformed from a cluttered storage space into an organized work area. You've done more in a week than the last manager did in a year, Thomas said, meaning it. Rosa sat down behind the desk, looking more comfortable now that the inspection was clearly going well. I believe in doing a job properly. Clearly. Thomas sat in the visitor's chair, suddenly curious. Can I ask you something personal? Rosa tensed slightly but nodded. How did you end up in that situation? You obviously have skills. You're intelligent, organized. She was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. Life can change quickly, she finally said. I came to this country 5 years ago with a degree in business administration from Peru. My plan was to work, save money, and eventually start my own small business. What happened? Reality, Rosa said with a small shrug. My degree wasn't recognized here. My English wasn't perfect. I found work where I could, cleaning houses, serving food. I was making progress, saving money. Then my mother got sick back home. The medical bills took everything I had saved. Thomas nodded, understanding all too well how quickly financial stability could disappear. His own family had walked that edge when he was young. After that, I was just working to stay afloat, Rosa continued. One missed paycheck, one unexpected expense, and she gestured vaguely, the movement encompassing the bench where he'd found her. I'm sorry, Thomas said, and meant it. Don't be, Rosa replied firmly. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. You asked, and I answered, but I want to be clear about something. She leaned forward, her gaze direct and unfaltering. I'm grateful for this opportunity, but I don't want to be your charity project. I want to earn my place here. I want to be judged on my work, not my circumstances. Thomas felt a surprising rush of respect. In his world, people rarely spoke to him with such straightforward honesty. They danced around issues, worried about offending the billionaire. Rosa's frankness was refreshing. Fair enough, he said. Then as your employer, I'll tell you that based on what I've seen today, you're doing an excellent job. The position is yours for as long as you want it. The relief that flashed across her face was quickly masked, but Thomas caught it. This job meant security to her, a chance to rebuild. Thank you, she said simply. As Thomas left the building, he found himself thinking about Rosa's story. How many others in his employ were one crisis away from disaster? How many struggled while he lived in luxury, never giving their circumstances a second thought? For the first time in years, Thomas felt the stirrings of something that had driven him when he first started his company. A desire not just to succeed, but to make a difference. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that, becoming focused on wealth for its own sake. Perhaps finding Rosa on that bench hadn't just changed her life. Perhaps it was changing his too, in ways he was only beginning to understand. A month after Rosa took over as building manager, Thomas found himself taking the detour past her building more often than necessary. Each time he told himself he was just checking on his investment. Each time he knew it wasn't true. Today he had an actual reason to visit. As his car pulled up to the curb, he noticed the small garden in what had once been an ignored patch of dirt behind the building. Several tenants were working there, planting and watering under Rosa's guidance. She spotted him and excused herself from the group. Thomas, she said, wiping her hands on her jeans as she approached. She'd finally stopped calling him Mr. Chen, though it had taken weeks of his insistence. I didn't know you were coming by today. I wanted to deliver this in person, he said, handing her an envelope. It's the approval for the budget you requested for building improvements. Rosa's eyes widened slightly. The full amount? Thomas nodded. Your proposal was thorough and the costs reasonable. And since tenant satisfaction is up and complaints are down, it's a sound investment. The truth was, he would have approved 10 times the amount, just to see the careful smile that now spread across Rosa's face. Not the polite, measured smile of an employee to a boss, but something more genuine. Pride mixed with satisfaction. "Thank you," she said, tucking the envelope into her pocket. "The tenants will be thrilled. Mr. Patel has been asking daily about the elevator repair." Thomas glanced at the garden, where an elderly man, presumably Mr. Patel, was showing a young boy how to properly space seedlings. "Looks like your community garden idea is working out. It's bringing people together," Rosa agreed. "We have doctors and janitors, teachers and delivery drivers all living in this building, but they never really knew each other before. Now they trade recipes for the vegetables they grow." Thomas watched the scene, feeling a strange pang. When was the last time he'd had a conversation with a neighbor? He lived in the penthouse of the most expensive building in the city, and he couldn't even name the people who lived on his floor. "I actually had another reason for coming by," he admitted. "I wanted to ask your advice on something." Rosa looked surprised. "My advice? Let's talk inside." In her office, Thomas took the same visitor's chair he'd sat in during his inspection a month ago. The room had evolved since then. There were plants on the windowsill, children's drawings pinned to a bulletin board, and a suggestion box that looked well used. "I've been thinking about what you said about your situation," Thomas began, "about how quickly things can fall apart, even when you're doing everything right. About the cleaning service taking most of the money while paying the actual workers barely enough to live on." Rosa's expression grew cautious. "Yes? I want to make changes in how my company handles these things, starting with the cleaning service that employed you. But I don't want to make the same mistakes. I don't want solutions that look good to me but don't actually help the people who need it." He leaned forward. "You've lived it. You understand what would have made a difference. I want your perspective." Rosa was quiet for a long moment, studying him. Thomas felt oddly vulnerable under her gaze, as if she could see past the expensive suit and billionaire status to the person underneath, the one who was finally admitting he didn't have all the answers. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why what? Why do you suddenly care? You've been wealthy for years." "What changed?" The question caught him off guard with its directness. But Rosa deserved an honest answer. "I saw you on that bench," he said simply, "and I realized that I knew nothing about the lives of the people who make my life comfortable. I've been walking around with blinders on, telling myself that because I pay well, I've done my part. But that's not enough, is it?" Rosa's expression softened. "No, it's not. So help me do better." What followed was one of the most enlightening conversations of Thomas's life. Rosa spoke about the reality of working multiple jobs to make ends meet, about employers who promised full-time hours but delivered part-time paychecks, about the impossibility of saving for emergencies when every dollar was already accounted for. She talked about the humiliation of having to choose between medicine and food, about the constant anxiety of knowing that one missed paycheck could mean homelessness, about the exhaustion of maintaining a professional appearance while sleeping in shelters. "It's not just money," she explained. "It's dignity. It's security. It's knowing that your work is valued and that you'll be treated like a human being, not a replaceable part." Thomas took notes, asked questions, really listened. When Rosa finished speaking, he sat back, his mind racing with ideas and possibilities. "I want to hire you for a new position," he said suddenly. Rosa frowned. "I thought you said I could keep this job as long as I wanted." "You can," Thomas assured her, "but I'm offering you an additional role. A consultant for my company on employee welfare and corporate responsibility. Part-time to start with. You'd help me redesign how we handle everything from wages to benefits to working conditions." "I don't have the qualifications for that," Rosa protested. "You have exactly the qualifications I need," Thomas countered. "You understand the problems in a way I never can. You have a business degree, practical experience, and more insight than any high-priced consultant I could hire." Rosa shook her head, but he could see she was considering it. "Your board would never take me seriously." "They'll take the results seriously," Thomas said confidently. "And they'll answer to me, not the other way around." "I would need to keep my position here," Rosa said. "These people depend on me now. Of course. We'd work around your schedule here." Rosa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where the tenants were still working together. Thomas watched her, struck again by her quiet strength. In just a month, she had transformed not just this building, but the community within it. What could she do with greater resources? I'll do it, she said, finally turning back to him. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to be treated as an equal in meetings, not a token or a prop. I want to see real changes implemented, not just talked about. And I want to start with the cleaning service. Done, Thomas agreed without hesitation. When can you begin? I already have, Rosa said with a small smile. I've been thinking about these issues for years. I have ideas ready. As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Thomas felt a shift in their dynamic. This was no longer just about him helping her or her working for him. They were becoming partners in something larger than either of them had anticipated. There's one more thing, Thomas said as he prepared to leave. I have a charity gala this weekend. Normally, it's just wealthy people congratulating themselves on their generosity. But this time, I want to announce some real initiatives, starting with the ones we're going to develop. Would you come and speak? Tell your story? Rosa looked startled. Me at a gala? These people need to hear from someone who knows what it's really like, Thomas explained. Not filtered through people like me who can only imagine it. He could see her discomfort at the idea, putting herself and her struggles on display for the wealthy to examine. But he could also see the moment when she recognized the opportunity it presented. I'll need something to wear, she said practically. Thomas laughed. I think we can handle that. As he walked back to his car, Thomas felt more energized than he had in years. For too long, his business decisions had been driven solely by profit and growth. Now he had a chance to remember why he'd started his company in the first place. To make things better, not just bigger. And it had taken seeing his maid sleeping on a bench to remind him of that purpose. Rosa stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress, a simple but elegant dark blue gown, had been delivered that morning along with shoes that fit perfectly in a small clutch purse. She'd asked Thomas not to go overboard, and to his credit, he hadn't. The outfit was beautiful but understated, allowing her to look appropriate for the gala without feeling like she was in costume. You can do this, she whispered to herself, smoothing down the fabric with slightly trembling hands. In just a few hours, she would be standing in a room full of the city's wealthiest and most powerful people, telling them about sleeping on benches and working 3 jobs just to afford a shared apartment. The thought made her stomach twist. Not from shame, she had never been ashamed of working hard, but from the strangeness of it all. 2 months ago, she had been invisible to people like them. Now she was supposed to make them see what they had spent lifetimes avoiding. A soft knock on her apartment door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Thomas standing there in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the billionaire he was. Ready? He asked, then noticed her expression. Having second thoughts? Rosa straightened her shoulders. No, just processing how strange life can be. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. I had the same thought earlier. If not for a traffic detour on a cold night, we wouldn't be here now. Small moments can change everything, Rosa agreed, grabbing her purse and closing the door behind her. In the car, Rosa rehearsed what she planned to say at the gala. Thomas had offered to have a professional write a speech for her, but she had refused. These would be her words, her truth, not polished and sanitized by someone who had never walked in her shoes. Are you sure your friends are ready to hear this? She asked as the car entered the wealthy part of town where mansions sat behind high walls. Thomas looked out the window at the manicured gardens passing by. No, he said honestly, but that's exactly why they need to. The gala was being held at the city's most exclusive hotel, a place Rosa had cleaned but never entered as a guest. As they walked through the gleaming lobby, she felt eyes on her. Curious glances from people wondering who she was, why she was with Thomas Chen. Ignore them, Thomas murmured, guiding her with a light touch on her back. They're just not used to seeing me with anyone interesting. Rosa smiled despite her nerves. In the past weeks, as they had worked together on plans for his company, she had discovered that beneath Thomas's Billionaire, exterior was a dry sense of humor and a growing willingness to question the world he had long taken for. Granted, the ballroom was a scene from another world, crystal chandeliers, flowers that cost more than a month's rent, people draped in jewelry that could have paid off her mother's medical bills in an instant. Rosa took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was here. The first hour was a blur of introductions and small talk. Thomas stayed close, smoothly introducing her as my colleague and advisor, rather than explaining their unusual history. Rosa was grateful for that small kindness. She didn't want to be seen as a charity case or an object lesson before she even spoke. She met Thomas's business associates, city officials, other wealthy entrepreneurs. Some were dismissive, barely acknowledging her once they realized she wasn't someone important. Others were politely curious, asking surface-level questions about her work without really listening to the answers. A few, however, seemed genuinely interested. An older woman who ran a major foundation asked thoughtful questions about the apartment building's community garden. A younger tech CEO wanted to know about Rosa's ideas for employee support programs. "Not everyone here is completely out of touch," Thomas said, as they found a quiet moment between conversations. "Some of them actually want to make a difference but don't know how. And the others?" Rosa asked. "Are about to be very uncomfortable," Thomas replied with a small smile, in a good way. When it came time for the speeches, Thomas went first. He spoke briefly about his company's new initiatives, a living wage program, expanded benefits, subsidized housing options for employees. He talked about corporate responsibility in terms of human impact, not just tax benefits. And then he introduced Rosa. Walking to the podium, Rosa felt as though she were moving through a dream. 2 months ago, these people would have looked right through her as she cleaned their homes or served their food. Now every eye in the room was on her. "My name is Rosa," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "2 months ago, I was homeless." The room grew very quiet. "I have a business degree. I speak 3 languages. I have never missed a day of work in 5 years. And still I found myself sleeping on a bench because one family emergency drained every cent I had saved." She told her story simply but vividly. The daily calculations of which bills could wait, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the fear each time prices went up while wages stayed the same. She described the invisibility of being the person who cleaned up after others, present but unseen. "I was lucky," she continued. "A chance encounter changed my path. But there are thousands in this city who are one crisis away from where I was, even though they work full-time. Many of them might have cleaned this very room we're standing in now, or washed the dishes we'll eat from tonight." Rosa looked directly at the audience, meeting their eyes without flinching. "You have the power to change this. Not through charity galas once a year, though those have their place, but through how you run your businesses, how you treat your employees, how you value the work that makes your lives comfortable." As she finished speaking, there was a moment of uncomfortable silence. Then the older foundation woman stood and began to applaud. Others joined, the sound building until the whole room was applauding, some enthusiastically, some more reluctantly. Thomas joined her at the podium. "Thank you, Rosa," he said, genuine respect in his voice. Then he addressed the crowd. "This isn't just about feeling good tonight and forgetting by morning. I'm establishing a new division in my company, focused on workforce support and community development. Rosa will be leading it, and we're looking for partner companies who want to join us in making real change." The rest of the evening passed in a whirlwind of conversations. Some people avoided Rosa and Thomas, clearly uncomfortable with the challenge to their comfortable world. But many more approached them, some with skepticism but curiosity, others with immediate enthusiasm and offers of support. "I think we've started something," Thomas said as they finally left. Hours later than planned, Rosa nodded, exhausted but exhilarated. "The question is whether it will last beyond tonight." "That's up to us," Thomas replied. "And I have a feeling you're not going to let anyone forget." In the car driving home, Rosa looked out at the city lights, the same view Thomas had seen the night he found her, but now from a completely different perspective. "Thank you," she said quietly, "not just for the job or the opportunities, but for listening, for being willing to change." Thomas was silent for a moment. "I should be thanking you," he finally said. "I've been successful by most measures, money, power, influence, but I'd lost sight of the purpose behind it all. You reminded me what really matters." As the car pulled up to her building, Rosa made a decision. "Would you like to come in for tea? Meet some of the tenants? Mr. Patel makes an amazing chai and they're probably still up in the community room." Thomas looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd like that very much." Walking into the building, Rosa realized how much had changed. 2 months ago, she had been fighting just to survive each day. Now she was not only secure, but in a position to help others. 2 months ago, Thomas had been isolated in his wealth, disconnected from the realities of most people's lives. Now he was about to sit and have tea with the kind of people he'd previously only known as employees. Small moments could indeed change everything. And as they entered the warm, lively community room where tenants of all ages were gathered, Rosa knew that the biggest changes were still to come. 1 year had passed since the night Thomas found Rosa sleeping on that bench. A year of hard work, setbacks, triumphs, and changes neither of them could have imagined. Today, they stood together in front of a different building, a former hotel that had sat empty for years until Thomas bought it. Now, after months of renovation, it was ready. "Are you nervous?" Thomas asked, glancing at Rosa. She smiled, more confident than she would have believed possible a year ago. "A little, but mostly proud." The sign above the entrance. "Read New Beginnings Housing and Resource Center." It was the first of what they hoped would be many such centers, places where people facing housing insecurity could find not just temporary shelter but comprehensive support to rebuild their lives. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered for the opening ceremony. There were reporters, city officials, and business leaders. But most important to Rosa were the faces of people from her apartment building. Mr. Patel with his homemade cookies for the reception. The young mother whose child care co-op had become a model for the program they would implement here. The retired teacher who had volunteered to run literacy classes. "It's time," Thomas said, checking his watch. Rosa nodded and stepped up to the podium. Public speaking no longer terrified her as it once had. Over the past year, she had told her story dozens of times, to corporate boards, to city councils, to groups of workers and executives alike. Each time it had become easier to find her voice. "Welcome," she began. "1 year ago I was homeless despite working full-time jobs. Today I stand before you not just as someone who found a way out, but as someone determined to hold the door open for others." She explained how the center would work, providing temporary housing while connecting people with job training, healthcare, financial counseling, and other resources they needed to achieve stability. Unlike traditional shelters, residents could stay until they were truly ready to transition to permanent housing. The center would also serve as a hub for research and advocacy, collecting data to drive policy change. "This isn't charity," Rosa emphasized, a point she and Thomas had agreed was crucial. "This is investment in human potential. When people have stability and support, they contribute to their communities in countless ways. Everyone benefits." When she finished, Thomas took her place at the podium. His speech was brief but powerful, focusing on how businesses could address root causes of housing insecurity through fair wages, benefits, and flexible policies. "A year ago, I thought I understood success," he said. "I measured it in dollars, in market share, in headlines. Now I know that true success is measured in lives improved, in communities strengthened, in systems made more just." He looked at Rosa. "I'm grateful to my friend and partner who had the courage to show me what I couldn't see from my penthouse view." After the speeches, as they cut the ribbon and showed visitors around the new facility, Rosa marveled at how far they had come. The initiative they had announced at the gala had grown beyond anything they had initially imagined. Thomas's company had been the first to implement comprehensive changes, raising wages, offering flexible schedules, providing housing assistance and emergency funds for employees. The results had surprised even the skeptics on his board. Employee retention improved, productivity increased, and the company's reputation soared. Other businesses had gradually joined the effort, some out of genuine concern once they understood the issues, others from seeing the business advantages. Either way, thousands of workers were now benefiting from policies that recognized their humanity and their needs. Of course, there had been challenges. Not everyone had embraced their vision. Some executives had dismissed Rosa as naive, patronized her, or tried to co-opt her story for public relations without making real changes. Politicians had made promises they didn't keep. Some days the systemic nature of the problems had seemed overwhelming. But there had also been victories that kept them going, like the cleaning service workers who received back pay and benefits after Thomas led an industry-wide reform effort, or the former shelter resident who now managed the front desk at the new center, welcoming others with the understanding that came from shared experience. As the day's events wound down, Rosa and Thomas found a quiet moment in what would be the center's community garden, still just freshly turned soil and a few starter plants, but full of potential. I've been thinking about that night, Thomas said. If the regular road hadn't been closed for construction, if I had chosen a different bench, and Rosa added, if I hadn't looked out the window at that exact moment. They both fell silent, contemplating how easily their paths might never have crossed. Do you know what today is? Rosa asked after a moment. Thomas looked puzzled. Friday? It's exactly 1 year since you offered me the apartment manager job. The night you drove me to the building and I saw the apartment for the first time. Thomas smiled at the memory. You were so suspicious of my motives. With good reason, Rosa said, but without bitterness. Rich people don't usually notice people like me, let alone try to help. I'm glad I noticed, Thomas said quietly. I'm glad you did too, Rosa replied. But I'm more glad you listened. That evening, they celebrated with a dinner at the apartment building. Not a fancy restaurant or exclusive club, but the community room where residents had organized a potluck. People brought dishes from their home countries, shared stories, and toasted the success of the new center. Thomas, who once would have felt uncomfortable in such a setting, now moved easily among the residents. He knew their names, their children, their struggles and triumphs. They no longer saw him as just a billionaire, but as Rosa's friend and their ally. Watching him laugh with Mr. Patel over a game of chess, Rosa felt a wave of appreciation for how far he had come. The man who had found her that night had been wealthy but isolated, successful but unfulfilled. Now there was a warmth to him, a groundedness that came from genuine connection. As for herself, the change was equally profound. She had gone from focusing on survival to leading systemic change, from invisibility to having a voice that people actually heard, from feeling powerless to knowing her true power. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, a young woman approached Rosa. She recognized her as someone who had recently moved into the building after facing eviction elsewhere. I wanted to thank you, the woman said hesitantly, not just for the apartment, but for everything you're doing. My sister just lost her job, and I told her about the new center opening. She's going there tomorrow. Tell her to ask for me, Rosa said, squeezing the woman's hand. We'll make sure she gets the support she needs. After the woman walked away, Thomas joined Rosa by the window. Outside, they could see the garden the tenants had created together, now lush with vegetables and flowers. So, Thomas said, what's next? Rosa smiled. A year ago, that question would have filled her with anxiety. Now it filled her with purpose. We've made a good start, she said, but there's so much more to do. Thomas nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. As they looked out at the city lights, Rosa thought about all the people out there still struggling as she once had. One center, one building, one company making changes, it wasn't enough. But it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings were all you needed to change everything.